G'day everyone, my name is Stephen Tripp. I'm the President of Australians for Better Government, and welcome to the latest edition of the Political Philosophy Masterclass. This is number 7, so we've done quite a few of these so far. Hopefully people that have been watching this have been enjoying it and been finding it valuable, because we're getting a lot of knowledge from the wealth of knowledge himself, Dr. Christopher Reynolds. How you going, mate?
Oh, I feel like a brain drain, mate, if you've been sucking all this information out of me. There's a hole in my head. There's a song about that, isn't it? Like, I need another hole in my head. But all right, If you're draining all this information, I hope you're having fun.
And you were in Sydney yesterday.
Well, yeah, I got this new book that's different in as much as with the book, What a Capital Idea, I put at the end of the chapter these interesting characters, because I felt like there were all these people that sort of fell off the timeline of, big events. So I'll put one in at the end of each of these chapters. But then after that, I thought, well, we could do more than that. People talk to me about, we need to make a movie out of the big book. And I thought, well, you need a script. And to get to a script, we need dialogue. So I decided that I was going to take 20 of these great characters and really get into their lives. And it was somewhat difficult because, you take Hamilton Hume and you think, well, he walked to Melbourne and back. That was 2,000 miles. What else do we know about him? What was his life like? How did he react? What sort of person was he? So I got into all of that. So I've written this stuff up like it reads like a novel with these short stories, but it isn't, because all the facts are correct, all the dates and what actually happened and the meetings, etc. So anyway, it's taken me a couple of years to do this in my spare time, apart from doing political philosophy interviews and whatever else. But I've read incredibly widely to be able to become those characters. And if I take Lachlan Macquarie, for example, I drove around for 3 weeks thinking, I've got to become him, so that when I write, it's actually what he would say. So it was sort of really getting on set with these people. And when I was ready to write a section, it would be literally walking on set. Where's the sun and the furniture, and who's there and what time of day it was. So anyway, I finished it. So apart from a bit of a blue with the printer, anyway. The book, I flew in from the printer a number of copies to talk on Macquarie yesterday at the Automobile Club in Sydney, a beautiful club, among 95 of the pioneer women of Australia, all there, these high-class ladies, lovely ladies. And, I went through a number of stories of Macquarie. And then when I sort of finished and said, this is basically your story, it's not a collection of stories, this is your story as Australia, this is who you are from your past. And I said the next step is to do a curriculum. I'm going to write a curriculum to teach Australian history. And the women just burst into applause. I was sort of, I was dropping my mouth and in shock at the energy that came back at me. So that is the next task. And of course, I sold out all the books that I had, and the women were so over the table. It basically, it was one of those roller games for me to try and get to the table to sell them the books. So the enthusiasm is beside itself. So if you like a good yarn and you've got an interest in Australia and a good story, then this is going to be a phenomenal book to read. You're going to absolutely enjoy it. Anyway, that's my big day out, was to come down to the Big Smoke yesterday.
Yeah, definitely. And we're going to get Australians for Better Government to commission you to write a civics course as well, because that's definitely needed, not just for our youth, but just for the adults as well. We obviously had a big event in Gympie on the weekend at Empowered, ABG Empowered. If you want to watch that footage of the event, you can watch it on this YouTube channel, the ABG YouTube channel, and other places as well, like Commanding the Narrative and elsewhere. But one of the things when I hit the stage and I was talking about our system of government and separation of powers and those sorts of things, there was a lot of blank stares in the crowd, a lot more than I've seen in the past, because they were trying to catch up with our system and understanding our system, and it's just not taught. People don't understand preferential voting, let alone the separation of powers and how a system should actually function. So I guess that's a big reason why we do this channel here in this show, to try and educate people in our system and what our system could be. But also, I think we need a course to actually roll out to people so they can understand our system. And I think you're the man to do it.
After I rewrite the Constitution, you think we can squeeze that bit in, with this. I'm making progress on that front too, don't I? But we are going to rewrite this Constitution. There's a number of things. Even today, there needs to be a couple of clauses that I'm going to point out. We've got some real problems with the way our system works. Oh, how did it go up in you went to Gympie, right?
That's right. Yeah, it was excellent. We had a great crowd. We had great speakers. The speakers blew my mind at how good they were. In all honesty, I think we couldn't have found better speakers in Queensland, apart from including yourself, of course.
Yeah, I was going to say, watch it.
No, Dr. Gary Johns was great. Scott Challen from the Australian Lobby Group spoke very, very well. Adam Zara, all the way from Campbelltown City Councillor Adam Zara is always great, always speaks from the heart. And of course, Katie McCallum was probably one of the best speakers in Queensland or in all of Australia, with her passion and her no-holds-barred attitude to just pushing back against the state of this country and how it's being run. So, yeah, it was a great event. We had a great feedback from people. It was a great turnout. The footage is up online now if you want to go back and watch it, and I do encourage everyone to watch it. But that is one thing I did notice, that people were coming up to me afterwards saying, you taught us so much in just your 15-minute speech. So Australians for Better Government has a lot of work to do to educate the Australian people on our system of government and to get them up to speed, even before we can convince them on the changes that are needed into optimizing our performance of government. So anyway, that's what we're doing, and that's what we're doing on this show here today. And we're going to talk about a big topic today, which is probably going to need a lot of education, because people would hear the terms Terra Nullius and Terra Regis and Terra Populi and go, what the hell are these guys talking about? But
popcorn, new bread of popcorn.
Maybe let's start with the first one, and that really probably is the most significant one, and it shaped the structure of our government here in Australia, or at least the first colonial footsteps that this country took. And then obviously fast forward to the Mabo case in 1992 and how that reshaped our direction. And that comes to the Latin term, Terra Nullius. So do you want to pick it up from there?
Yeah, I do. Now, you're going to have to excuse me as I read some stuff, but to get it right, if you'll allow me to just read a few paragraphs here and there, because I don't want to just waffle on and make mistakes with this stuff, because it's just too important. So in the book, What a Capital Idea, I've got a section on this business of Terra Nullius becoming Terra Regis. And so I'm going to read a bit of this, so just bear with me. It says, the concept of Terra Nullius dates back to old Roman law. Any land that was deemed not subject to a sovereign state, unsettled or uninhabited land, was considered Terra Nullius. That is, and we need to get this term right, because the quote that you just had, or the clip you had of the news, the definition that the newsreader had is totally incorrect. It is not that nobody lives there. The rule, it means terra, land. Nullius means nobody rules there. The land is not owned and can't be seen to have a sovereign ruler or a king or a parliament over the land. So just because you've got people running around, it didn't mean that you had an authority, a king, that actually could own the land. And the other thing is conquest. If you really wanted the land, why use Terra Nullius when you could just walk in, slaughter a few people and say, I'm here, and still declare Terra Regis, which is what we're coming to. So the word Terra Nullius itself means nobody rules here. Now, you remember that there's 500 warring Aboriginal tribes, and little tribes, some are down to just a dozen people. Some had a couple of hundred people, but hardly anything to compare with Britain, with its massive civilization, huge navy, 400 warships, more than Australia's got today. It's just not a comparison. So anyway, the King of England says that's
so, before you get going, I want to cut in because I think the terminology is important, and I just want to bring up two sources that I've quickly had a look at. This firstly is the Encyclopedia Britannica, and it says Terra Nullius is a Latin term meaning nobody's land. It refers to territory that has not been annexed by any nation.
It is annexed by, but the Latin term nullius means, because you're talking rules. This is senates and parliaments. They don't care about who's walking around as the other similar terms. They're talking about the use of power, who owns the land, which is sort of there in the definition, but it's not. It's the term is actually who rules, that nobody rules the land. Yeah. Which with sovereignty also means owns or works it.
Okay, let me bring up this one quickly as well, and this is the last one. This is the Australian Museum. This is their definition of Terra Nullius. So we'll go down here. Terra Nullius is today used as a catch-all phrase to explain how Australia was founded to justify and legitimize the dispossession, dispersal, and inhumane treatment of First Nations peoples. This Latin term means land belonging to no one, which has been interpreted as a complete absence of people, and additionally, the absence of civilized people capable of land ownership.
Well, somebody working in the library or some bureaucrat hardly has skills in Latin, in classics, law, or ethics to know what they're talking about. That was just a piece of rubbish and rubble.
Well, this is what they're teaching. I mean, kids go to the Australian Museum and get taught this stuff.
Yeah, but, it's sort of like saying, the sun spins around the moon. I mean, it's just so wrong. And, you can hear the political jargon that he's throwing in. Australia's got nothing to do with a term that's 2,500 years old. I mean, it's just a stupid thing to try and take. It's called eisegesis. When you read into something what you want it to say, rather than exegesis, allowing the verse or the text to speak for itself. So, we get these, this is what's causing the trouble, is that these ratbag bureaucrats just go at something with a pen without any educational knowledge of what they're talking about.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm going to hit you with some more stuff, but carry on first. And
let me get down to some stuff that people that wrote about this. Yep. In all the discussions on the issue of colonising Australia, there was no consideration of whether Australia was anything. Nobody thought that Australia was anything but terra nullius before Britain took possession and declared sovereignty over New South Wales under the doctrine of Terra Regis. Now, that's land, but the word regis, where you get a whole range of derivatives, means the king, the king's land. He is what is it? You get the word reign comes from this. What's it? Either regal. It all comes from this word regis, the king's land. There were two internationally accepted legal and political principles to claiming land under sovereign power. First, the land could be claimed where the land was seen to be effectively without a ruler or owner. You see, even those quotes said belonging to. And so it's referring to somebody who owned it or ruled it. If it belongs to you, I own that horse, and the horse will do what I tell it to because I am the owner and the ruler of. So you've got to watch that they're using a term but don't understand it. Therefore, terra nullius, even if it was inhabited, even if land was inhabited by an indefinite population of itinerants, hunters and gatherers, it still applies. The second principle was that the nation's claim to unruled land could not be done simply by proclamation. It's not a de facto thing where I say, I think we'll take over Tasmania, but we never go there. You've got to, and this is an old Irish concept, the nation had to occupy and settle the land, as you'll see in a minute, in the name of a king. The ancient notion of sovereignty, whereby you had to occupy and work the land to own it, was further developed by the philosopher John Locke. ownership of a country through habitation could only be established when labour was mixed with the development of the land through agriculture and construction. Cultivation was necessary for ownership and sovereignty. Now, here comes a quote. There's this famous book, The Principles of Habitation and Sovereignty. And when we're talking about sovereignty, this is Terra Regis. Who owns it, who rules it, that's sovereignty. The Principles of Habitation and Sovereignty are set out in Émeric de Vattel's The Law of Nations, or the Principles of Natural Law of 1758. This is a French book, was recognised by Britain and the European countries everywhere. So the quote is, the law of nations will therefore be acknowledged, will acknowledge the property and the sovereignty of a nation over any uninhabitable countries, except those of which it has maybe will not acknowledge the property and the sovereignty of a nation over any uninhabitable countries, except those of which it has really taken actual possession, in which it has formed settlement, or of which it has made actual use. Thus, if the British were to make a sovereign claim to Australia, they would have to settle it. They could not have de facto use of the thing. So let me just come down. I hope that's sort of clear. Is that clear? That with this business of Terra Nullius, it wasn't just Britain. This is international law and law that would be upheld in the international court in The Hague. So Spain used the law of nobody rules when it moved into North America. The Spanish had owned a third of all North America, which is called the USA these days, and quite a lot of South America. This is why so many people still speak French. That's the French, the Portuguese, the Italians, the Russians, the Dutch, apart from the English. But you also had America use the principle when it moved in and took Hawaii and a number of other places. I mean, it bought Alaska. And where did Australia use Terra Nullius, which becomes the point in a moment? Well, we just moved in and took Norfolk Island, Bougainville, New Guinea, as well as those islands, which we're going to talk about in a minute. So that's how we took New Guinea. Now, Queensland decided there were Germans. I think there was a problem up there. The Germans or the Russians. I think it was the Germans. So they decided that they needed to take possession. They wrote to Britain and said, we need you to declare a letters patent from the King taking possession. And Britain said, well, we've had enough of that this week. We don't need any more land. We're trying to get rid of it. So Queensland, because as a colony had a parliament and had power as a colony, made the acquisition of New Guinea under the law, the international law of Terra Nullius. Australia used it as well because it was accepted. And it's only up until the Mabo thing, as we'll see in a minute, where other jurisdictions also accepted Terra Regis. The king owns it. So here's the background of what actually takes place in this first instance.
Before you get to that, I want to jump in because I don't have an example of it, but I've seen it written in different places that the British invented this term of Terra Nullius and claimed it was international law just to give it justification to go around the world and steal land. I mean, what's your answer to that?
It's a lie. I mean, it's an idiot that wrote that, an absolute idiot that wrote that. I don't care who he is and what his qualifications are. I mean, if you haven't studied this and you don't know the legal precedents, and even the judges in a minute knew a few at least cases, if not some doctrine and some history. I mean, it's just you can't say it's rubbish. It's worse than that. The person saying that is so ignorant. They are, with wit or without, lying to whoever's reading it. I mean, the British invented this. You're looking at ancient Rome, and this is a 2,500-year-old principle.
All right, I want to play a clip. It's a lengthy clip. This is from a channel called Oz Historian. I'm going to play this first, get your reaction, and then allow you to explain what happened with the Mabo case in your...
Yeah, okay. We'll jump into Mabo.
Okay. All right, let me play this, and we'll see if we can get you to calm down at all.
Calm down. I've already called somebody a liar, right? So no.
All right, here we go. This is from the Oz Historian YouTube channel.
Property. Long before foreign ships ever appeared on the horizon, this continent was mapped by oral tradition, ecologically organized, and profoundly seen by the millions of people who lived there. In 1770, British explorer Captain James Cook arrived on the eastern coast, claiming the territory for the British Crown. This created a glaring logistical problem, attempting to claim a landmass undeniably occupied by millions of human beings. To bypass the physical reality standing right in front of them, the British government deployed a specific legal workaround. They invoked Terra Nullius. This Latin term translates to land belonging to no one, and it functioned as an ideological tool to solve the empire's administrative conflict. Under 18th century British law, land ownership required specific Eurocentric markers, permanent stone cities, fenced agricultural plots, and drawn paper borders. Because indigenous society operated through sustainable environmental integration rather than stone walls, their 60,000-year history failed to register on the British legal checklist. The law recognized that humans were walking the continent, but it classified them as legally invisible to the state. By engineering a highly specific definition of property, the empire dissolved an existing society through a bureaucratic filter. Terra Nullius provided an immediate practical advantage. Britain could colonize the entire landmass without the requirement to draft treaties, negotiate boundaries, or secure consent. The results were catastrophic. Indigenous communities were forcibly displaced from their ancestral homelands, severing thousands of years of localized ecological and cultural knowledge. This systematic displacement operated with the full protection of British law. Every eviction and every seizure was authorized by that single underlying doctrine. Terra Nullius was an actively weaponized concept, a legal mechanism used to achieve historical erasure. For over 2 centuries, this doctrine remained the bedrock of Australian property law. That ended when an Indigenous man named Eddie Mabo launched a decades-long challenge against the government. He demanded the courts recognize his people's historical ownership. His fight led to the landmark 1992 High Court ruling. The justices declared that Terra Nullius was a historical fiction, and that Indigenous land rights had existed all along. This decision forced the legal system to drop its artificial filter, aligning the law with the physical reality of the continent. One of the oldest continuous cultures on Earth was almost entirely erased by the application of just 2 Latin words. Today, Australia continues to navigate.
Okay, so a lot there, lot of narrative, you might say, is there. How much of that do you think is historical fact? How much of it is ideology? What's your interpretation?
Oh, it's political. It leaves out a lot. You see, because the voice, with computerized or an actual person, it concentrates on the term Terra Nullius. The person doesn't realize, hit them in the head and say, what happened to relinquish the Terra Nullius? How does that move? Does it remain Terra Nullius? No, it didn't. It became Terra Regis. And this becomes the fundamental problem, that these people making comments don't understand that when Britain took the land and declared, it wasn't even Britain declared Australia was Terra Nullius. It was known to be without a sovereign ruler. It didn't belong. There was no sovereign that owned and ruled. Now, when Terra Regis comes in, it's the king's land. Where the king went, so went the king's law, and so went the king's army, and so went the king's protection, and so went the king's civilization, so went the king's society, and so went the king's benefits of that society. So to sort of think that you're better off with terra nothingness, with no ruler, meant what? It meant barbarism. It meant primitive society. It meant no civilization. You see, here's the other the thing with this. We go, oh, these ancient people, they were so much better off as they were. And here came colonization. Well, today, colonization under another term is welcomed. You see, a place that hasn't got development is Terra Nullius, nobody's ruling or making or doing anything with the land, is called undeveloped or underdeveloped. And what do they want? They want it to be developed. So if you take the UAE as an example, after spend a number of years there, when I first went there, it was only a couple of years earlier that the tribe in Dubai got on their camels with their guns and went down the highway to take on the Nyan family from Abu Dhabi. And that while a fella in the northern state of Sharjah went off to study in England, his brother took over Sharjah. And so the fella had to contact the Dubai people and say, all right, I'll give you some of my land of the kingdom of Sharjah if you go and have my brother murdered, which they did, right? And I mean, I went to a primitive society, but along came some intellectual Brits, and they said, listen, mate, how would you like to be rich? And what have we got? Sand. Well, what's sand worth? Well, it's the concept. Get the concept. What about if we just design something like a city with lots of buildings and stuff, and you sell off the plan? So we will give it a value. So we'll give it a value of so many billions on the pretext that you're going to design something. So they then conned all these people into investing into the dream. There was nothing there but desert. And of course, now it's this incredible place. So they moved from no development with fellas on camels and silly big old guns running down highways to this incredible, almost first-rate world city that Dubai is today, with one of if it's not the tallest building in the world, because of that whole thing of what? Of wanting development, of wanting British money to come in and develop the place. So they're not whinging about colonization, which is, again, what is it? It's money coming in to develop something. So to think that you're going to run back to be Terra Nullius, that nobody's here and we want to be primitive, is a stupid idea. That we want to run back to being a barbaric group of people. Throw your phones in the bin and turn off your electricity and don't have any roads and cars. It's nonsense. But here's the problem. That little clip you played is going on about Terra Nullius because the person who wrote it doesn't realise that the real problem is not for them, is not Terra, that nobody was here, but Terra Regis, that the king just declared that his rule and his civilization and his law had arrived. But let's go and have a look at Mabo.
Well, can I just quickly ask you one final question before we get to Mabo? I mean, you're talking about international law. You're saying, okay, well, this wasn't just British law. It went back to the Romans. The French adopted it. The Spanish, the Portuguese, they were all adopting it. Not only Britain recognised their claim to Australia, but so did all these other countries. From an Aboriginal perspective, their claim, from what I've heard from some research, is, hey, all of that means nothing to us. That's your law. That's stuff that you guys have implemented or made up. But to Aboriginal people on this land, this is our home, this is our land, and you have no right to come here and I guess settle and whatever. I mean, what's your response to that from the Aboriginal perspective? Well,
firstly, watch that word right, because they did have a right under international law and the law of Terra Regis and Terra Nullius.
But what does law mean to a primitive society?
I got a point. Firstly, let's look at what we are talking about. The Aboriginal tribes of Australia had no sense of value. And Gary Johns, with his book, points this out very clearly, that you couldn't trade with the Aborigines, you couldn't do money with them, you couldn't swap with them, because there was no sense of anything having value, and life didn't have value. So there wasn't the Christian principle of life or possessions that was there. So Gary gets into this and says that life just had no value. So there wasn't any other than law, but basically a law of the tribes and the family. But when you get into it, it was barbarism. These were the most primitive. They were called people on Earth, and were called across the globe as savages. Cannibalism was there, as it was in the Pacific and a number of other places. But we're talking about barbaric people. So where you actually then want to say that these people had land rights, okay. But they were intertribal rivalries anyway, and they didn't even see that they owned land. There was no concept of owning anything. It's a Western idea that you actually own or something belongs to you, that you've got a right of ownership, whether it's the house, the car, or something else. It's not an Aboriginal idea. It was a community that shared things in the land. So you get, on the other side of that same coin, you hear people talking about being, and it comes up in Maba, being one with the land. I feel one with the land, that I'm not. There's a good line that that's in one of the fellow that was the rigger on the Harbour Bridge.
Paul Hogan
movie, and he was quoting someone else. It's not that the Aborigines own land, but the land owns them, or they're part of that sort of ecosystem. But it's a nice line that talks about that they just see themselves as part of the synchronicity of the universe. It's it's almost a Hindu idea that you're just you're part of it all. So there wasn't any sense that you could own it, because you're just part of life, all of life, and everything that goes on. So to force this Western idea on a primitive society that's sort of into Taoism and animism, and sort of say, oh well, you now were the first people here, First Nations. Well, they weren't a nation at all to own anything. But the other side of it is that colonisation was the best thing that could happen to this poor, primitive people. Now, I fully appreciate what actually happens with their own society and the intermixing of the races, and what that did to the marriage system and the 4 different groups or whatever you were, that you had to be of one of them to actually be able to marry across the 4 possibilities. And how intermarriage then destroyed that, which is why full-blood Aborigines, if they came across a half-breed or a baby, would kill them, and would probably still do the same in northern Queensland and Northern Territory with full-blood Aborigines, trying to stay pure. They don't want the mixing of these other people that are living on the cities, which this caused the growth of the Creole people, the Aboriginal people living on the edge of the cities. Not that I'm wanting to dehumanise it at all in anything that I say, but I mean, when you start talking about ownership, colonisation, see the average life expectancy, what was it? It was, I've got to think how many babies actually died, but 1/3 of all Aboriginal children were dead before the age of 11. I mean, the poverty, the disease, if you broke a leg, that was the end of your life. So to actually see to see the statistics on a longevity rise against food, clothing, healthcare. I mean, you can't possibly stand there and say, no, we don't want any of that. We don't want healthcare. We don't want food. We don't want clothing. We don't want medicine or education. I mean, who in their right mind would stand there and say we don't want that? Nobody, except those that have already got it, looking back and saying, oh, but we also want bigger and better handouts. So it's a silly notion to say, let's all run back and pretend to be primitives before the British arrived.
All right, well, let's get to the Mabo case, because that was a significant event. And, going back to the voice referendum, I interviewed an Aboriginal elder called Kerry White, and she brought this up during the times that I interviewed her twice. In the times that I interviewed her, she said Eddie Mabo wasn't even Aboriginal. He was from the Torres Strait, and they see the Torres Strait Islanders as not even Aboriginal. They consider them to be part of Papua New Guinea. And she described the big divide between the Aboriginal tribes and mobs, as she put it, and that's an Aboriginal term. And she specifically stated the divide between the city mobs and the rural mobs, and basically the rural mobs want to be left alone while the city mobs are the activists. But she would bring up big divides, like, say, for example, South Australian Aborigines don't play the didgeridoo because they think it's got evil spirits. I know other tribes don't allow women to play the didgeridoo. So there's big differences between all the areas. But specifically to Eddie Mabo, how did he become such a figure? Yeah. And some Aboriginal people, I'm not saying all, but some Aboriginal people like Kerry White turn around and say, well, he wasn't even Aboriginal.
Yeah, it is. Now, here comes the thing in the Mabo business we're about to look at, and I'll jump ahead. And it comes out in Mabo where, while these guys go back and forth, it's politics. You see, this case had already been lost in the Queensland court. Why was it in the Queensland court? Well, because Queensland had used the letters, used the power of the king with the letters patent and legislation to take over all of that region. So anyone that wanted to say, we want power over our own destiny, well, we want to give up the cars, the food, the supplies, the ships, the clothing and the healthcare, or we want all of that, and we want to have our own parliament. Do you put a challenge? And Mabo didn't. It was a complete legal setup. Of course, he didn't have legal training, etc. And he, by the way, he was dead by the time this came to the High Court. There wasn't any Mr. Mabo to have a case. It was all, well, don't tell anybody that he's dead. Well, how on earth can you have a case for dead client? But there you go. So it went to Queensland, and then more politics brought it onto the High Court. But the High Court says, well, and there's a lot of contradictions. And one of the things that actually says that we're about to read, it says, well, yeah, the Murray Islands are not part of Australia. Well, what are you doing hearing this case then, fellas? Oh, well, it's a good piece of politics and we want to do it. And they just declare that they're going to do it under Australian law, even though these islands have not been annexed to be part of Australia. And I mean, what are you doing? It was a piece of nonsense. So that's how it ended up in the High Court, because it was totally politically motivated and pushed. And that's the only thing you can say as we have a look at this document.
All right. So let's talk about, you want to read some parts?
I'm going to give you a series of quotes, so just sort of hang on them.
Yeah, okay.
So this is on the first page or so, and these are, I'm not going to read you the 150 pages, Steve.
So this is from the verdict from the High Court?
This is 150 pages on Mabo, and it's mostly waffle. But there's some important points. Oh, it is, and you'll hear it as a minute. There's somebody that calls these guys treasonous. Anyway, some quotes. Just as the Crown acquired, or is deemed to have acquired, universal ownership of all land in England, so the Crown became the owner of all land in the Australian colonies. Now, this is they do not at any point question the right of the British Crown under Terra Regis to take the land of Australia under the condition of Terra Nullius. It is a complete fallacy, if you read through this document, to think that the High Court challenged England's right, Britain's right, to take Australia under the law of Terra Nullius. It does not question it. And I lifted from the 150 pages just quotes like this. I ended up with 5 pages where the High Court of Australia admitted that Britain owned Australia, and this is just one of them. So the Crown became the owner. Remember, this word owner becomes important because does not belong. Owner of all land in the Australian colonies. Let me just give you some quotes. The British acquisition of sovereignty over the colony of New South Wales was regarded as dependent upon the settlement of territory that was Terra Nullius consequent on discovery, and the law of New South Wales is the source of the law applicable to the Murray Islands. Is it? Okay, so they just decide that Britain owned it all. We have British law. They use Terra Nullius on the point of discovery, which is not quite right. And therefore, the law of New South Wales is the source of law applicable to an assessment of the Murray Islands. When British colonists went out to other inhabited parts of the world, including New South Wales, interesting, the settlement there under the protection of the forces of the Crown, so that the Crown acquired sovereignty, possession, belonged to, recognised by the European family of nations under the enlarged notion of Terra Nullius. It was necessary for the common law to prescribe a doctrine relating to the laws to be applied in such colonies. For sovereignty imports supreme internal legal authority. Where the king went, so went the king's law. So you can see again, this is quotes from Mabo. They're not questioning the Crown's power because it's treason to do so. In 1913, Judge Isaacs, I think it's in New South Wales here, said it was unquestionable that when Governor Phillip received his first commission from the King George III on the 12th of October 1786, the whole of the lands of Australia were already in law the property of the king. And there's a famous judge called Blackstone, and he says the same thing. He says, when the king signed the letters patent in 1786, from that point, Britain owned Australia. That was even before anybody arrived. The moment the king said he owned it, he owned it. And in 1913, in Australia, this judge said the same thing. The whole of the land of Australia was already in law. So looking at precedents for Mabo, they've got a real problem dodging this, and I'm going to show you what they did. Further down, native title to land survived the Crown acquisition of sovereignty. What? Why? How did it? How did native title survive Crown's acquisition? And here's a principle. When, if I get this right, when the king takes the land, it is total acquisition. It is not a compromise. It is not partial. It was total acquisition. So this sentence to say native title of land survived the Crown's acquisition is called treason, and you'll hear about it in a minute. What's this got? The Crown's acquisition of title and sovereignty over its possession of land extinguished any and all continual right to native title. That's a comment on. So somebody in the court deciding that it survived, it can't. It was extinguished. So you've got a real problem here. Native title is extinguished to the extent of the inconsistency. So that's another quote. Where the Crown has validly alienated land by granting an interest that is wholly or partially inconsistent with the continual right to enjoy native title is extinguished. And that's what happens when you've got Terra Regis. Native title continues where the wastelands of the Crown have not been so appropriated or used. Well, that's nowhere in Australia. What's the other one I got here? It is immaterial that the laws and customs have undergone it doesn't matter that we don't have the same land and that there's been changes and the people have changed since Crown acquired sovereignty, provided the general nature of the connection. And I hope it comes out here. There's this weird phrase of native title continues because of this weird connection to the land. And it becomes racial. So let me see if we find that in a second. I'll try to move quick. Native title is an area of land enjoys under customs and indigenous people is extinguished if the clan or group by classification observe those customs. Now I need this particular phrase and then we'll move on. Oh, well, all right. I'm at the virtually end of it. Now, here we come, because I was just running through the Mabo decision. And when you get to the conclusion of 150 pages, and after 100 pages, the court decides it's not going anywhere to challenge Terra Regis or Terra Nullius, so it turns to land law. So maybe under Australian land law, we can find a way to say we can give people land, and that somehow because the original claims are not extinguished, which they were. But here comes the conclusion, and it says, we declare that the land in the Murray Islands is not Crown land. Well, what are you doing having a court case on something that's not yours? Secondly, we declare that the Meriam people, must be another word for Murray, are entitled, as against the whole rest of the world, to occupy, use and enjoy the land of the Murray Islands. Well, here comes the first problem. If indeed you're saying that the Murray Islands don't come under your jurisdiction, how can you declare that they've got any rights? It's not your right or jurisdiction to be making any decision about these people. Where's this last thing I want? And conclusion of the Mabo case, the judgment was, I declare, says the judge, that the title of the Meriam people is subject to the power of the Parliament of Queensland and the power of the Governor in Council of Queensland to extinguish or continue to possess the title by valid exercise of their respective powers. Wait a minute, they just said, we haven't made a decision on that land. We have not said that they can have native title. We have not said that they can possess or use. They have said it's none of our business. It's none of our business. Is subject to the power of the Parliament of Queensland, not the power of the Supreme Court of the Commonwealth Government. It doesn't say Commonwealth Government, or the power of the Governor of Queensland. Now, here comes the problem, and I'll jump on it right away. The problem is that with our Constitution, we think we have this fundamental democratic right, the only thing that's in it that seems to be democratic, and that is the separation of powers. That it was the states, the people of the states, that do hereby form this Constitution and form the federal government. And it runs through and it says that the states have all of these rights, and what we don't retain, we give to the federal government. Well, the states retain the right of their lands and over the Aboriginal people and the welfare of the people within their state, which is why at this end of the Mabo things says the land and the jurisdiction of lands under Queensland is Queensland government. It's got nothing to do with the federal government, because the federal government hasn't got that power under the Constitution. So how did they fix this? The following year from Mabo is when Keating then passed a federal law, and he just stepped all over Queensland law and said all Aboriginal land and rights, etc., now come under the federal government. The same thing is happening today. With Bowen, with he wants to have the power used for the data centres coming from windmills. And Queensland and the Northern Territory premiers have said, go sit on it, because we have so much energy coming from coal and gas that we don't need to have your windmills that fail all the time when you're talking about supplying these data centres. And particularly Northern Territory is in the news today saying, well, we've got this great big gas basin and we fully want to use, and it's our right to use, the gas that we have to power a station. And Bowen has said, well, if that's your attitude, I'll go and write some legislation and take it off you. Now, where is democracy in that when the federal government continues to just assume any power and rights that it has? We have a constitutional problem that at least Mabo said we don't have any right to be even hearing this case.
Let me quickly ask you. You said that with the separation of powers between the states and the federal government, what is not ceded is retained. So basically, if the state government doesn't give power to the federal government can't take that power away from the states. So how did Keating come in and then take over the power of native title? Did the Queensland government and the other states cede that power to the federal government?
No, there's a clause there somewhere in the Constitution, Steve, that we have to go and find and put a pen through or make it stronger. You see, this business of that which is not given is retained is fundamentally within the American Constitution and the rights of the states. So that's why we hear all the time, these states are suing the federal government for something, or they're making claims. And 3 or 4 or 5 states will even get together and saying, we're suing the federal government because you've got no right. Now, the federal Supreme Court was established to ensure that the federal government didn't take away state rights and state rights didn't assume the powers of the federal government. That's what they declare to be unconstitutional, where the government oversteps the powers that it has been given. But in our situation, I keep telling you, we don't have a democracy. It was only because the states were saying, all right, we'll band together. The referendums were in the states. They weren't, and even today, when we have elections, it's the states that have representatives in the federal parliament and the Senate. So, but there's something in our Constitution that allows the federal government to assume responsibilities such as war powers or something. And we need to do something about it because it is totally taking the power of the states that form the federal government. It's taking the power away from them, and we need to fix it.
So let's follow the timeline. So the Aboriginal people were here, the British arrived, they say they've got Terra Nullius to take ownership of the land, and the land of Australia now becomes Terra Regis, which is the Crown's land. So the British Crown of Australia, the British Crown owns Australia. Up until the Mabo case. The Mabo case happens. Keating introduces legislation to bring in native title and land rights and all these things. What did that transform Australia into? Are we still Terra Regis, or are we a hybrid system now? How do you describe it?
Well, it gets in 1986 with the Australia Act, we keep the term Crown, but Crown now becomes the federal government. And it's still all land of Australia is Crown land. And it doesn't matter if you own a block of land in Redfern or outback somewhere, Redlands. If the government wants to assume your land, and there is a clause, and it says, what's the term? It's sort of with reasonable
compensation.
Yeah, it means compensation. In the movie The Castle, the lawyer there stands and says on reasonable grounds, and he then sings a social welfare song. What about a family and caring for their family? Is this on reasonable grounds? Well, it's a financial thing. Reasonable grounds meant pay them a certain amount of money. So, I mean, The Castle is basically, when you come at it, having a go at Mabo. It may be a comedy movie, but it's not. It's about Mabo and the stupid grounds. What if a person, feels one with the house or the garage or the backyard pool? Surely they can't just take this away from them on reasonable grounds. And so it's a piece of absolute stupidity to be saying you can't extend the airport, something for national significance, because you've got 5 houses with people in love with their racing dogs and the smell of the chlorine coming from the backyard pool.
Let me take you back to the Australia Act. So the point you made, if you want to clarify if I'm wrong, you said, so prior to the Australia Act, it was the Crown's land, so the British Crown owned the land. Post the Australia Act, the federal government owned the land now. So Crown land is now owned by the federal government in a sense.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yes, they become the Crown. Now we have
Is this where the argument comes in, where people say that Australia is a corporation? And
no. I mean, that's just so off the track with what we're doing.
Okay. Maybe that could be an episode.
Can you see me rub my face? I don't know if I'm on camera or not here, but did everybody just see me, with disgust? No, fellas, no. It's a whole other thing with stock markets and things. I don't want to hear about that. No, lawyer. But you see, we keep this thing that's an undemocratic form of government called responsible government. It was never meant to be democratic, as we've talked about under the American and Christian concepts of equality and freedom and self-determination and those sort of things that the Americans then, Christian principles, said this is democracy. And this was a dirty word for those people. Which people? The people in power with money. The people with power and money wanted nothing to do with equality and rights and whatever else was in their freedoms and things. They want to preserve what they had. So it's in that context that when we become, even in 86, the law, the Australian Act basically says England will have no more to do with running Australia. And it's at that point that they take a line through the Privy Council and say nobody, which means Bjorky Peterson, can run off to the Privy Council and get judgments over what the federal government was doing, because it was the last real bastion where England had any say in Australian politics, and it had to be cut. And that's what the Labor Party was doing in forming independence, which is another thing. We are totally independent. We only have this symbolic thing of a governor and the king. He's the king of Australia, so the Crown sort of sits with this fellow that has no power, and it's only symbolic. It's an image, virtual is what we've got. But we're a long way from although it sounds like the federal government is the Crown, the problem is the Crown as such, the sovereignty over this country is not the people. We have not progressed to Terra Populi. We only have lex parlamenti, that is, power is in the parliament, and we only elect people to go to the parliament, and then it's a free-for-all of what happens there. We are not a democratic country.
All right. So we're towards the end. I didn't expect this one to go so long, but it has been very, very interesting. We probably could go for another hour, but
I've got to get to the best bit.
Hold on. Let me ask you this. So the theme that I've kind of picked up on in doing these episodes with you is that Australia is on an evolution of how we formulate our system. And I guess hopefully Australians for Better Government has a role to play in that. But we haven't reached our maturity as a nation in how we run ourselves. And that comes from when the Aborigines were here and how they conducted themselves and ran themselves. And when the British came, Terra Regis, coming to the colonies and federation and step by step we're going along. We're seated, the Australia Act comes in, we cut the ties to Britain. This has all been an evolution for Australia and how we run ourselves. And it might be a slow evolution, but from what I'm gathering from speaking to you, we haven't matured completely and we still have some steps to go. Is this where Terra Populi comes in?
Yes, it does. But you said something that's interesting. Today, I'm going to get onto this racial business in a second. But you see, if you've got a group of people, and let's be realistic, we now have a group of Muslim people that if you want to have power in this country, whether you're an Aborigine, whether you're a Muslim, whether you're from India, whether you're from China, if you want to say in this country, in the politics of this country, get elected, run for parliament, get elected. We have a system where you can have a voice, you can represent your constituencies, get elected. instead of trying to manipulate your way to form a committee over the top of everybody else, and say our little group of people that aren't really a racial group, but we're going to call ourselves a racial group, are going to override everybody else's opinion and have a committee over Parliament. Not acceptable. Get elected. If you think, and there seems to be a lot of people that want to support Aborigines having power, great. We'll elect them. Jacinta Price is there. She's elected. Without all the kerfluffle and all the rest of it. She doesn't have to claim I'm of a racial group. Get elected. Anyway, give me just a couple of minutes to hit this very important point. Can we do that, mate?
Yep.
All right. I'll run through it. Now, this comes from a fellow by the name of Robert Hill, and he's talking about the mislogic and the basic sin of Mabo. So this is great stuff. He quotes a case from Coke, observed in this particular case, allegiance and dominion over things so united as they cannot be separated. For the king's dominion was the very source of law, and to impair it was to strike at the roots of the Commonwealth. The king's dominion is the very source of law. So these guys on the High Court only have power as judges under the king's dominion. You know, so they're shooting themselves in the foot. But here comes the point. The guy says treason is properly an offence immediately against the king's majesty, wherein the king is wounded in his regal capacity. The moment you go and say, oh, here it is, I'll let him say it himself, that the doctrine of Terra Regis, the king's land, held that upon the acquisition of sovereignty, all land vested absolutely, indivisibly, and exclusively in the crown, and that no competing system of tenure or title could survive without the express royal recognition. Blackstone put the matter plainly. This is this famous judge. All land in England are holden immediately or immediately of the king, and there is no allodial land within its realm. I imagine subsections. For the king is the universal law and original proprietor of all lands. To deny this was to deny the crown, and to deny the crown was treason. So this spell is going on. It was the judicial creation of a rival hereditary land system, not derived from the crown, the recognition of a foreign authority within the, he's calling this business of the people, the First Nations, a foreign group, not derived from the crown, and recognition of a foreign authority within the crown's dominion. And they want to set themselves up. If you read the statement of Uluru, the people in the first page there declare that they are not Australian. They are a different foreign authority, they see themselves. And the same with that paper that they try to push through in Queensland under the Labor government, a pathway to ownership of something. It says on the first page that the First Nations people are not Australian. They do not recognise Australian law. Well, here we go with Mabo, who say, well, Australia doesn't own that land. We don't have any jurisdiction as a High Court over Queensland's land. And we want to recognise a rival authority by saying that these people have a sort of a feeling with, and it says that, a sort of a sense of belonging to the land. And we want to acknowledge a sub-legal racial group within Australia. Anyway, I'll give you one more. Let me see if I can find it. If the common law arrived in full, the principle is fatal to the conceptual foundation of Mabo. If the common law arrived in full, then no Indigenous law could survive independently, because the common law recognizes no divided sovereignty and no parallel legal system. And this also applies to Sharia law under the Muslims. There is no such thing. Under British doctrine, the arrival of the common law brings extinction, not accommodation, of previous legal and regal systems. The High Court invented a fictional mechanism called continuity of traditional law that contradicts the doctrines of sovereignty and reception, as well as centuries of imperial practice. He basically says Mabo is a racist document. And it's right, it is.
That's almost like a podcast in itself. As I said, we're at the end. I want to finish with Terra Populi.
All right. Yeah, good idea.
We haven't done a lot to really explain what that is, and we haven't done a lot to explain why you feel Australia needs to move towards Terra Populi, away from everything that we've just discussed, whether it be native title, Terra Nullius, Terra Regis, all that stuff that's come before.
Yeah.
How do we move forward as a nation in the future?
Okay. Well, let's stick with this concept of sovereignty, which is ownership, but it's the use of. It's an old Irish concept. You didn't own the land unless you worked the land. So if you're going to have sovereignty in Australia, whether you assign it to this person or that or whatever, it's actually to be using it. And that's it. So the moment we say Terra Populi, the land belongs to the people, it becomes the people's land for usage, for industry, for anything you want to talk about. Everything then comes under the people's decision, the people's law. There is going to be no division of the people's law. If you want to participate in the law-making process, get elected and represent the people. So the difference is that a representative government is not democratic government. There's the quote of the week. Representative government is not democratic government. And we've talked about the fact that democracy is for and by the people, which means that you're talking about equality for people. You're talking about freedoms. You're talking about self-determination. And under freedoms, you've got freedom of speech, freedom of religion, equality under the law, that you've got a right to trial. You can own land and develop land and do what you want with your land, although it still obviously belongs to the sovereignty of the people. You don't just lease it as we pretend to do. And again, we've got our representatives. At the moment, we elect representatives of a party. And I think there needs to be a limit of 10 years or something on any representative. And there needs to be a limit of 10 years on the people on the High Court. We need fresh blood constantly. But these people that make a career out of it, it's got to stop. And we've got to do something about the party politics. The thing in the end of my book on What a Capital Idea, I pick up this whole idea about where we're going. And while I want to say we do need to evolve, and we do need to actually, write down what it is that we want, I said we've got a real battle, because will independence, as it were, popular democracy ever come? And I cynically say I don't think so, for two reasons: power and money. What government, what premier, what prime minister, what party is ever going to give up their control of money and power to say, you're right, we need to be just the legislators, and there needs to be an elected president governor that actually runs the government? We've got a real fight to try and get power away from the people that currently hold it. But it's got to be done.
Well, we need a revolution of thinking in this country.
Yeah,
I think that's where it starts, and we need to start these conversations, and we need to start these discussions, which is what Australians for Better Government is trying to do. And if you are interested in what we are trying to do, please head to our website, australiansforbetter.com, and you can see all our proposals up there. But you can also follow us on social media. You can attend our events, and you can also become a member at australiansforbetter.com. So I do encourage everyone to head to the website and check that out. And also share this around, let people know about what we're trying to do, and join the conversation, join the discussion. You may have some great ideas of the direction in which Australia is meant to go, but I think we probably should pick up on this topic again, Dr. Reynolds, in a future episode, this idea of Terra Populi and what it could mean for this country, because I think that's where the discussion needs to go. We can talk about the past and what's happened, and that's important to put things into context, but we really need to have a discussion on how to transform our system, have a revolution of thinking, and really optimize our the performance of our system, because that's what's beneficial to the Australian people ultimately, and that's what we want. We want a better future for this country and all the people that live here and all the generations that are going to come, not just our generations, but the future generations as well. That's what we should be striving towards in this country. So thank you again, mate. I've appreciated it. Is there any final word that you want to have on the topic of Terra Nullius, Terra Regis, and Terra Populi? Because this has been fascinating to me. I didn't expect this episode to be so fascinating, but I've really enjoyed this one.
Well, as long as it wasn't a terrible show, we did all right, I suppose. I mean, the concept that even, as I redo all this stuff, it comes clear. How can you have a subdivision culture or group within the country? You rather have a national law or you don't. You've rather got a nation or you've got tribes, and we are on the brink of tribalism in a number of instances, and we have to then we need to do something about. But what was the phrase about that which was acquired cannot be extinguished. You can't just sort of say, well, we've got a rule of government and we own the country, but not all of it. I mean, it's a silly idea, isn't it? That you've got divided law and authority, and that where is the democratic principle of equality? If you're going to say, well, one particular racial group or religious group could have more. What's the phrase? Oh, all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. No, thank you. So that's my last thought, is we need to be an equal country where people have equal opportunities.
I agree. All right. So if you've enjoyed this discussion, you can check out this channel every second Thursday on the ABG YouTube channel. I do post it in some other areas as well, but the ABG YouTube channel is probably the best place to go to hear from Dr. Reynolds and future political philosophy masterclass episodes. Hopefully people are learning things and really thinking about things going forward. But if you want some more content from Australians for Better Government, please also check out Empowered recently that we had up in Gympie. You can see here a panel of Scott Challen, Dr. Gary Johns, Katie McCallum, and myself discussing all things politics and discussing everything that we talked about reforming our system of government up in Gympie. So that's online now. You can check out all of that footage and all the speeches that occurred. Also, if you want to get more content from Dr. Christopher Reynolds, you can head to his website, drchristopherreynolds.com. You can get his old book now, that What a Capital Idea, and the new book that's coming. Dr. Reynolds, I see you've got your hand up. You want to add something?
Yeah, I've still got this book out. There's another 1,000 arriving in 4 weeks. Don't give up on it. This is a rewrite of Australian history, and this stuff like Mabo is in it. And you really don't know where we're going until you have a look at those last two chapters. And the stuff about Clark is just phenomenal that I deal with. But yeah, if you want to know more about Australia's history and fall in love and have some pride in the country, get the book, What a Capital Idea, Australia 1770 to 1901.
Yep.
There you go.
Again, you'll get that.
Mate, where's a picture of the book?
Oh, I've had it. Here we go. I'll bring it up on the screen. As I said, head to drchristopherreynolds.com and you'll get that book where you can see that book there in the blue with the nice big sailing ship on the front cover. It's a big, massive book, is well worth the read, and it's well worth the money. And everywhere that Dr. Reynolds goes, he sells out, oddly enough. I mean, it's a big book, but you managed to sell them, mate. And I haven't heard a cross word about the book. And most people say that they're blown away by the content and the research and the history that you've got crammed into that book. So looking forward to the future one as well, the one that's about to hit the shelves.
It's just absolutely a lot of fun, I mean, you get to hear the humour of the different people, because life is full of funny events, etc., and the silly things people do. So, all right, that's all makes it up, doesn't it? It's supposed to be a land of larrikins and pirates and convicts and brawlers and stuff. Well, that's us.
Yep. One final thing. Also, before I go, plugging in the website again, australiansforbetter.com. There are really some great proposals on there. Also, our merchandise shirt is on. Our merchandise shop is on there as well. If you want to get an ABG hat or a shirt or pins as well, the pins are actually very good. It helps support us in spreading the message of Australians for Better government, because unfortunately anything that you do in the political realm, you do need some money, so we need to generate some funds somehow. So hopefully by giving you something cool to wear around, you can also support us in the process. It's a win for everyone, hopefully. But Dr. Reynolds, I've enjoyed it today. I think this is probably the best one we've done so far. I've give you a big tick. Big tick and a gold star for today. But thank you for everyone watching, and we'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.